I'm not Abigail, as the program suggests. So if you came to see her, I apologize. But I'm Brad Minaker. I'm a PhD student at McMaster. This is a paper with Abigail and with another co-author, Ross Hickey, who's at UBC Okanagan. So as you can see, it's called The Sensitivity of Charitable Giving to the Timing and Salience of Tax Credits. Governments provide incentives for charitable donations. We've had a good overview of the US tax system. So they're mostly tax deductions. Dan showed us an example of a tax credit. In Canada, all of the incentives are in the form of non-refundable tax credits. So non-refundable in that you can't get back more tax than you've paid. So yesterday and a lot of today, we talked about how giving's been flat. And so we want to know what role government can play in motivating more giving. Again, thank you to everyone else who's presented these two papers as well, the Randolph and Otten. So you've had a good overview of that. So our research looks at two areas that are going to affect the donation decision. And so it's the timing. So we want to know how a change in the timing of claiming the tax credit for donations affects giving. And the salience. So how does an increase in the salience of the tax credit affect giving? So just so we're all on a level playing field, by salience, we're going to say how well perceived information is. So we want to know how much you know about the tax credit and how much of the information that you know is accurate. So we use a natural experiment. So the Haiti earthquake happened January 12th, 2010. Extensive damage, 250,000 lives lost. Governments in Canada provided incentives. So the federal government matched donations made to Haiti relief organizations. And the province of Quebec allowed donors to count donations made between January 12th and February 28th on their 2009 tax return. For the rest of Canada, donations made were reported on their 2010 tax return, which would be 12 months after Quebec. So this just summarizes the two effects. So the timing effect, we can see that Quebec, donors in Quebec are claiming the tax credit a year earlier. The salience, we're going to say there's a bit on both sides, that the fact of this natural disaster and the match is going to increase the awareness of the tax credit. But the fact that the provincial government in Quebec also advertises that you can claim this tax credit earlier is inherently advertising that there is a tax credit that's available for donations. So the timing is going to decrease the price of giving by decreasing the discount rate, and the salience decreases the price by changing the perceived price. So we talked about how the price of giving is 1 minus your tax credit rate. So if you don't know about the credit rate, or if you don't know about the tax credit, you'll think that $1 of donations is going to cost you $1. And if you're aware of the tax credit, you know that it actually costs you less than $1. So just to cover a little bit about the Canadian tax code, the non-refundable tax credits, as I mentioned, they're two-tiered. So the first $200 in donations you make in a year are given a single tax credit rate, and then anything over $200 is given a higher tax credit rate. There's a federal rate and a provincial rate. So this gives the column here, shows for the federal rate is 15% for the donations less than your first $200 in donations, and anything more than that is given a tax credit of 29%. And then this is just 4 provinces that we've picked. All provinces of Canada are in our sample. This just gives you an idea. And so they vary. Quebec is the most generous. The under $200 combined with the federal is 35%, and over is 53%. So the data that we use is federal tax return data aggregated to a neighborhood level. So we define a neighborhood as an FSA, which is the first 3 digits of your postal code. In the US, you have zip codes. In Canada, we have postal codes. So they're 6 digits long. The first 3 are called your FSA, and they define a neighborhood. It's about 7,000 to 8,000 households in that neighborhood. An interesting feature, we don't itemize or not itemize in Canada. Everyone has the same tax return. So anyone who has taxable income has incentive to, and who has made a donation, has incentive to include that donation on their tax return. So we get even low-income people will still be in our sample for the data that we have. So we have overall donations in a year. We don't have broken up into Haiti, non-Haiti. We just know how much you've given in that year. So from that, we get the number of tax filers in a neighborhood, the number of donors, and the total amount of donations. So we create 3 measures that we want. We want the extensive margin. So we use percent changes, which I'll explain in a couple slides. So share of tax filers donating, the average donation per donor, and then the extensive and intensive margin together are the donations per tax filer. This gives you basic differences. We've aggregated to 2-year periods. I'll explain why in the next slide. But you can see that about 22% of tax filers in Quebec are donating, and the growth rate is about 0 from 07-08 to 09-10. 09-10, of course, has the recession in it heavily. So we can see in the rest of Canada, it actually drops quite a bit. So then the difference is 4.2 percentage points. Average donation per donor is significantly lower in Quebec than it is in the rest of Canada. And so there's a lot of cultural reasons for that and other things that I won't get into, but it's lower. And again, it's falling over these 2-year periods, but not as much as in the rest of Canada. And then the donation per tax filer follows a similar pattern. So we have a couple threats to our estimation. The first is this time of reporting. As I said, we have overall donations. We don't have specific Haiti versus non-Haiti. So what we'd want to compare is Quebec in 2009 tax returns to the rest of Canada in 2010. But there's other things, of course, that are changing through those years that would make this a bit of a sketchy comparison. So what we're going to do is we're going to aggregate 2009 and 2010 together. So all the Haiti donations are going to be in there for both Quebec and the rest of Canada. The second concern, and is perhaps our biggest concern, is that we want to make sure that we're actually measuring a response to this tax policy and not to the disaster. So Quebec is very French. Most neighborhoods, I'll show you a slide later, there's over half of their neighborhoods are over 90% French, which is not true in the rest of Canada. And so Haiti also has a lot of French-speaking citizens. So that's one concern, that there's this cultural proximity. The other concern is that because of that language proximity, a lot of Haitian immigrants will immigrate, if they immigrate to Canada, will immigrate to Quebec. So what we do is we use matching estimation. So we match neighborhoods in Quebec to neighborhoods outside of Quebec that look similar on a number of measures. Another thing that I'll show you here is this is data, this is separate data. So this is from Canadian charities have to file information returns just like in the US. Every single charity in Canada that's registered has to file. Religious charities, any revenue, if you have any revenue. If you have $5 in revenue, you have to file if you want to keep your status. So we have all of that data. In that, they have to report where they're working. So we pull out those that are working, report working in Haiti ever across these 3 years. And so we've broken it up. These are national organizations. So these are the national organizations in Quebec that we see. There's actually a fall in 2010 for the tax receipted giving. So this is in millions of dollars, aggregate numbers. In the rest of Canada, we see an increase. Okay, so these are just national organizations. They have to report whether they work locally, provincially, or nationally. These are just national organizations. So from this, it appears that the rest of Canada is responding. Everyone else is giving. And these are local organizations. So here we see the increase for Quebec, and we also see the increase for the rest of Canada. So this is trying to convince you that it's not just Quebec that's giving to the natural disaster, and the rest of Canada isn't. So what we might be finding is just this response to the natural disaster. These should hopefully convince you that all of Canada is giving to this, and what we're going to be measuring is just the response to the tax policy. The third thing that I touched on in the basic differences was that giving in Quebec is historically lower than the rest of Canada. And so what we're going to use is these growth rates. So we want to use the year over year, I guess it's 2 year over 2 year change. So we're going to compare 2007-8 numbers to 2009 and 10. With our estimation, we use propensity score matching. So we first estimate the probability of treatment, and then we're going to use these predictive probabilities to match neighborhoods that are equally likely to receive treatment in Quebec and outside of Quebec. The treatment, of course, is being in Quebec. We use different samples. So our first trim is that basically we're just excluding any neighborhood that's perfectly predicted to either be in Quebec or in the rest of Canada. And then we use more strict trim levels to get at a finer sample. So these are the first set of matching measures we use. So these just try and get at differences in charitable giving. So we use mean income, mean value of dwelling, the percent of individuals who make $100,000 or more, and the percent of low income. So these we have at the neighborhood level from the census. Then we add these controls for cultural proximity. So we want to control for the percent Haitian ethnicity and the percent first language French. So these are our first summary stats. So these are all of our neighborhoods here on the first two columns. And this is Quebec. This is the rest of Canada. Basically, out of this, you can see that Quebec has lower income, lower wealth, if we can think of value of dwelling as a somewhat measure of wealth, and more rich people, Quebec has less people who make over $100,000, more low income. This is the kind of stark thing, is that the average neighborhood in Quebec has 1.36% people who are of Haitian ethnicity, and it's 0.06 in the rest of Canada. In our high trim sample, these get a lot closer together. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to skip through this animation. Basically, this shows us, this is the number of neighborhoods by the percent French-speaking individuals in that neighborhood. This is a huge number. This is only in Quebec. And so our high trim basically excludes most of these neighborhoods. So this, again, should hopefully convince you that we're not just measuring this cultural proximity idea, because in our high trim, we actually have a good number of all the different percent French. Okay, so these are our results. So this is the percent change in share donating. In brackets are p-values. So a really low p-value is good. Your standard 10% is going to be 0.1. So anything with a p-value lower than that, we'd consider good. So with the 3 different trim levels, low, medium, and high, we find somewhere around 3 to 3.5 percentage points difference in the growth rates. This is the treatment effect, so the treatment of the neighborhood being in Quebec. For the average donation per donor, this number is slightly above 0.1, but these are both strong, and they're at about 9 percentage points. Then the average donation per tax filer, which should combine these two, is around 12 percentage points and precisely estimated. So we're finding strong effects on both intensive and extensive margin. This is you can think of this as like a placebo test. So we're saying one of the things we might be concerned about is we said that Quebec has lower giving. Maybe we're just measuring some catch-up effect or something like that. Like historically they had lower giving, but now there's something about them that they've decided to start giving more. And so we test for that. These high p-values are good. The only concern here is with our control 0506, treatment 078, in our medium trim, we have these on the average donation per donor, average donation per tax filer, which are positive and precisely measured. Ideally, we want zeros there. But it goes away once we go to our high trim sample. Finally, I said we're measuring timing and salience because when you announce that the timing of a tax credit is changing, you're inherently announcing that there is a tax credit. So one of the things we've tried to do to get at how strong the salience effect is to use the period after the treatment. So the timing is a one-time thing, right? You can report your donations to Haiti this year on last year's tax return, and that's it. But now that you know about this tax credit, maybe this is the first time you filed, now you know about this tax credit. And so we actually see positive and significant treatment effects still persisting 2 years after this treatment. But for average donation per donor and average donation per tax filer, they're essentially zeros. So we're finding that this salience aspect, we think, has an effect on the share donating continuing forward. Okay, and that's it. So basically look at this natural experiment and find that it influences both the extensive and intensive margin for donations. Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you.